It's really nice to see everybody here. It's really good that you've all sort of made the time to come this afternoon to hear about Greenham. It's fascinating that it's still of interest to people because you never know, do you really? Because when you actually do things like that, you don't think about it being historical. You're just doing it because you want to do it, and then suddenly later on it becomes something that's part of history, which is quite strange. It takes a bit of getting used to. Just to fill you in, I'm sure most of you know quite a bit about it already, but just to remind ourselves, in September 1981, a group of Welsh women from Women for Life on Earth marched to RAF Greenham Common in Berkshire. They were protesting against the decision by the British government, announced that year, to allow 96 American cruise missiles to be sighted at the base. After realising that the march alone was not going to get them the attention that they needed to have the missiles removed, the women stayed at Greenham Common to continue their protest and were soon joined by many, many more women. The peace camp continued until 2000. In 1985, the woman who produced these photographs visited the camp a couple of times with a friend of hers, including the local CND group. And she and her friend Maggie decided that they would go on a regular basis. And then she lived at the camp full-time from December 1988 until September 89. And the photos in this book are a selection of the many that she took at that time for her own personal use. And in recent years, she's become aware of the fact that the historic significance of the photographs was a visual record of that time. So I'll now pass this round and people can have a quick peek at that if they want to. Did you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm passing around lots of stuff about the legacy of Greenham, including the Iraq War and the 2012 Brighton Photo Biennale, which covered a lot of the photographs that Jenny is mentioning, were exhibited at that biennial, biennale, whatever it is. So yeah, I'll pass those around as well. But the main thing that Jenny wanted me to say, I think, is to talk, just to reference the way we organised, because we didn't have mobiles and some of us didn't have landline phones either. So how did we organise ourselves? We were often wondering about that. When we've talked about it, we reminded ourselves that we had telephone trees. You all know what that is? No. Well, if you imagine a tree with branches, each branch has several leaves at one branch. So we would have one person responsible for one branch, and all the other leaves, they would have a list of names, maybe their address, maybe where they hung out somewhere, and then the person with the responsibility for the branch would be responsible for telling all the others. I think that's how it worked. And yeah, each leaf, as it were, could then inform as many other leaves as they wanted. So, for example, with this organiser, to organise this, you probably know that on December the 12th and 13th, in what year was it? My brain's...
That was 81.
81.
Yeah.
There was a decision which nobody knows who it made. Decisions just happened to encircle the base by holding hands, and it was called Embrace the Base. So obviously we needed thousands and thousands and thousands of women to stand all the way along the perimeter fence, holding hands to embrace the base.
And that was a 9-mile fence. So it was a hell of a lot of women.
So we all got organised in our separate towns. One other way of organising was through CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and I'll be passing around a few of their amazing pamphlets, because if you read them now, they're exactly the bloody same. the same danger, the same reckless care, lack of care for safety, for the future of us all. It's still exactly the same, with a few tweaks for extra weapons here, of course, thousands more weapons now than there was then. So anyway, I've gone off message. CND had branches in many towns and cities all over the country, and all those branches were organising as well. So here in Brighton we had this wonderful little, we had this poster up everywhere which you probably can't read what it says at the bottom, where someone's stuck a bit of masking tape on, but at the bottom it says, this would have been hanging up somewhere like the Level, because it's got mud on the back, so I suspect it was the Level. And it says, coaches from Brighton, only £2 return. For tickets and information, ring Jan, and then a 6-figure number, 556 2744, and that's the landline number of the woman who was organising the tickets. And then she would probably have told anyone who rang where to go on the day and how to pay and to bring their money for their ticket.
And it's worth saying that I remember there being 17 coaches from Brighton, which each coach has about 54 people, if I remember correctly. I can't do the maths off the top of my head at the moment, but that's a lot of women. And it was extraordinary travelling up there with that, this sort of convoy of coaches, and all the stopping places on the motorway was filled with coaches of women coming from all over the country, and it was a wonderful feeling, actually, wasn't it?
It was it was an extraordinary time, definitely, and people were taking, because we knew, like, those of us who were going specifically weren't camping there all the time. We would only camp when our family or work commitments would allow us to stay there for any length of time. And Jenny stayed much more than I did, because at that time, in the early 80s, I had small children, so it was much harder for me to go and camp. In fact, it was impossible. My kids just would not tolerate it. And it was hard for me to do that and then go back to working full time during the week. So Jenny can talk about camping, but those of us who were just going for short periods of time, we always took stuff like cake. You know, people spent, women, mainly women, but some men who wanted to show solidarity with us would spend a lot of time cooking, so that we could take tins and, you know, boxes of treats and basic food for all the women that were camping there around the clock, because it got so cold up there and it was so bleak, especially when the troops came out at night, and they were working class teenagers from the northeast who'd been in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland before that. And they thought they were being soldiers, but when they realised it was women, we did one thing that was fantastic, where we hung up mirrors when they were facing us with their machine guns. I don't know how we organised that either, because that was another action we did, where the word went out, take a mirror to Greenham, and we all stood facing them, holding up our mirrors. And how did we do that without breaking the mirrors? You know, but then when they were doing that, they saw themselves, and that made them really very uneasy. And we never turned, well, in the camps I was in, we never turned down the option of talking to them, because many of us were working class anyway. We understood why they joined the army. I'm Irish, so I knew what they'd been forced to do in the 6 counties. And we tried hard to always, if they made any connection with us or made some comment, we always engaged with them, or we did anyway. I don't know whether you...
They didn't engage that much when you were staying there. They were really quite kept themselves apart. They also used to get into trouble if they talked to them sometimes.
Oh yeah, they would have done actually.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. And the MOD as well, they would try and talk to us, but they were trying to get information as much as they could. But yes, first Greenham was mixed, so there were men and women staying there, and it became apparent as time went by that that really wasn't suitable because the men found it very difficult to actually see women being hauled around by the police and the MOD, Ministry of Defence, obviously, and they also. It meant that it changed the dynamics. The having males there actually meant that the MOD behaved differently towards women and towards men to try and wind up and try and get the men to behave in an aggressive way, and they didn't want to. So it got very complicated. In the end, it was decided that it should be women only. It didn't take long for that to happen, and once that was happening, it changed it quite a bit, because women, it was very much about non-violent direct action. There were all sorts of actions that took place, but they weren't violent. They were never against people. I mean, as an example, the convoys used to go out. The convoy had all the nuclear weapons, and it had obviously lots of military going with them, and outriders and flares and all manner of equipment so that they could go and camp at Salisbury Plain. They went down there once a month. They would have some sort of action like that, and they'd spend the week aiming their missiles at Russia, which was extraordinary. And we marked every convoy. There wasn't a single convoy that went past that didn't get eggs or early morning breakfast thrown at the side. We never throw it at the front because that obviously could cause an accident. It's at the side of the vehicle so that they, would have a splat of pink porridge. We use a lot of food dye. And that actually really annoyed them because the stories that they were giving out was that it would be sneak out in the middle of the night and nobody would know, but we would know that they were going because we'd see the signs. They would go out during the day. There were particular trucks that would go out during the day, and we knew which trucks they were, and we'd follow them. In fact, there was a funny story one time. Sorry, I might be going on about it. There was I was sitting in a car with a woman called Marmalade, and Marmalade, we were sitting by a wood, and we'd been there all day waiting for these vehicles. We knew they'd be going past soon, and we were sitting there, and she said, I must go for a pee. So she got up and ran into the wood to have a pee, and along came the convoy, and I thought, and I couldn't miss it. So I went in front of it and went along in second gear all the way along. They were right up behind me, pushing. It was really quite scary, which is silly, but it just was quite something with this whole convoy of vehicles behind me. I had to go. There was what we called the double donut, which was two roundabouts, and you had to go to there to see which route they were taking to get to the Salisbury Plain, because that would actually indicate to you where they were going, because there were two different sites that they used, and so you'd then go to the phone and phone up the person at the beginning of the phone tree and say the convoy's on its way, and all the way down to wherever it was going, people would come out in the middle of the night or whatever. They'd come out and witness it going past and hold up placards and banners. So always that, and they were called Nuke Watch. It was a group that formed, and they would all, be talking down the line to each other.
There's a thing going round to add to from the Greater London Authority about nuclear-free London, because of the nuclear train that went along behind all our gardens, right the way through London. Yeah. And so the same thing happened in London. As soon as people realised that train trundling along in the dead of night was the nuclear train, people flagged it up and made sure that someone would always record its presence, and eventually then it got discussed.
Excuse me, you referred to it as the nuclear train. Is this where they actually transported the nuclear weapons from one part of the country to another, presumably to Greenham Common, for them to be actually placed onto the cruise missiles, and presumably that was the delivery system for all that, for those nukes. Presumably it was also extremely heavily armed policemen on there.
No, there was nobody. We never saw anyone.
No,
What?
that was.
You're kidding me? Sure, we talk about nuclear weapons here. You don't.
I think the
That's what I'm
nuclear
saying.
trains for
That's what
nuclear
I'm
waste.
saying. They kept it really quiet so hoping nobody would notice.
The completed weapons would go from Aldermaston and Greenham Common, Aldermaston where they were constructed, to Greenham Common, and they were flown in and out to various other bases. They also went by road up to Scotland, to Faslane, and still do, going through all sorts of cities on the way. And they, when they were on the trains, that was the nuclear material to get
there.
to get to Aldermaston to be turned into the weapons.
And it was.
And no, it wasn't guarded.
I remember it being. Again, I would need to research this, but I remember everyone being very frightened of the instability of these flasks that were rattling along in trains. And sometimes if there was an accident on the line and the train had to stop, or anything else happened, then that made the whole thing even more frightening.
Yeah, and I know one year when they were one time when they were taking the missiles up to Faslane, it was icy and snowy, and one of the lorries slipped and made everybody gasp, because that was serious. It could have been very serious. Because they've got explosives as well as the nuclear materials in them. In fact, nothing happened, but they managed to get it back onto the road. But and again, Newport actually followed. They made sure that there were people protesting along the route up to Faslane as well. So,
I mean, that's one of the mismatches between. If I'll pass these round. These are by Frank Lawn. This one's by Frank Lawn, who spent his life answering questions about nuclear bombs, nuclear weapons. And this is by E.P. Thompson. You might know this. We as citizens were given a booklet called Protect and Survive. I think there's a facsimile going around at the moment. E.P. Thompson wrote Protest and Survive from the depths of his life's research on what was actually happening, and then he followed it up with this part 2, the defence of Britain. And the basic thesis is, and it's proven over and over and over again, nuclear weapons don't prevent war, they increase the likelihood of it happening on a massive scale. So one of the arguments is that constantly they're putting out books like that, what to do to survive a war. The fact is no one will survive, so it's laughable. And they're also saying how everything is so safe, they've got it all covered, no one need worry in their beds because it's all fine. And when you get the scientists coming up with the actual facts behind that, it is actually a scandal that it's happening, still proliferating.
Just maybe it's worth sort of talking a little bit about daily life up at camp. It was quite extraordinary to be there because, first of all, you've got the weather. Today's a good example, really, isn't it? You might get soaked in a day several times. We always had a fire as much as possible, and most of the cooking took place on the fire, which was very difficult. In fact, during the winter months, there was a group of people who were mostly from Oxford who were wonderful. They brought hot food. It was called the Hot Food Run, and that went on from sort of about November to about April or or maybe it was sooner than that, but it covered the dark winter months when you can't cook your last meal at 3:30 in the afternoon. So they would bring round hot food, and it was just wonderful. And treats as well, lots of nice little things. And they were lifesavers. Because one of the problems that women faced every day was bailiffs. The bailiffs would come round with their, what we called the muncher, which was a dust cart lorry really, and they'd take whatever they could lay their hands on. And the film that was on, basically they would take everything, even people's personal possessions, which they weren't meant to take. They were accompanied by the police, who mostly had their backs to what was going on because they didn't want to know. They would take sleeping bags, they would take your clothing, they would take anything that they could lay their hands on. So we had to get up in the morning and quickly pack away everything that we could that was valuable. You first of all keep all your money and whatever about your person, because it's just not safe because they'll take it. But they would even take wood in the winter months so that we couldn't have a fire. I mean, they were the most horrible people. It's hard to imagine people actually going for that job. What's your qualification? Well, I like stealing from women. It's just extraordinary, really. So that was sort of the beginning of the day. And you didn't know whether they were going to come. They didn't come every day, and some days they'd come 3 or even 4 times. So you had to be ready right from the beginning, really. There were ordinary things that had to be done, shopping, cooking and washing. I mean, there was a friend's meeting house in Newbury, the nearby town, and they were brilliant because they allowed us to go in and use their washing machine and store stuff in there and have showers and so on. So that was a real haven. Did you ever go to the friend's meeting house?
Yes, it was lovely.
It was just so nice.
And it was like a little spa treatment, they would call it now.
Yeah. So it was, and obviously on top of all that ordinary stuff about life, there was, what are we going to do? Are we going, planning of actions and so on, and there were actions, some sort of actions most day. There were camps dotted all the way around the perimeter fence at each gate, and there was one very serious incident with one gate that faced the silos, and some women there got badly beaten up. The lights went out, and suddenly these 2 men arrived, and these 2 women who were, one then would have been about 40 and the other one would have been in her 60s. And they came out and they beat these 2 women up, and then they ran off, and then the lights came back on. Which tells you an awful lot, like, who knew that was going to happen and was able to turn the lights on and off. That was really nasty. So it was a strange sort of existence. I mean, some of the events that took place were hilarious. I mean, we used to like taking the mickey out of them because they took themselves very seriously. So, and if you don't take somebody seriously when they are in that sort of mind, it actually undermines them, and they don't quite know what to do with it. I can remember one time, I wasn't at this particular event, but the women climbed in, because you could break in fairly easily with a 9-mile perimeter fence. You can easily get to a place where there was no military around. I mean, initially they used to have fires.
So you said you could break in there easily. This
Yes.
is a space with nuclear weapons.
Yes, yeah.
You could break into it easily.
Yes. With a
Now,
bomb
can anybody
cutters.
spot the issue I have with that?
It's extra. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? A pair of bolt cutters And I mean, I can remember one time.
You sure you're not confusing this with some sort of pantomime?
I think it was a pantomime actually. I think it was really
Oh no, it wasn't.
Oh yes, it was. Yeah, I mean, you know, you could find a place where there was nobody around and get your bolt cutters out and chop a hole and go in. And these women on this particular occasion went in with some glue and some little plastic yellow ducks and glued them all the way down the runway. I mean, you know, it's just like, no, you know, I mean, it's just a real, we used to do very, I remember one time when we were, because the bylaws were being challenged all the time, they would arrest us and take us down to Newbury Nick and charge us and whatever, you know, and then you'd have to go to court and all the rest of it. But then that was challenged in court and it went back and forth. I can remember one time when we went and we climbed in, we went to Burfield actually, which is a nearby bomb store, which was absolutely horrific place actually. It's like fields, open fields with banks all the way around, filled with weapons. These aren't nuclear though, at Burfield. But we climbed it, we didn't even have bolt cutters. We went there, I drove us there, I used to have a car. And we just took a blanket and we just put it over the barbed wire and climbed in. Which isn't as easy as it sounds actually, but we just climbed over. In the end, we got fed up with walking around looking at these bombs and we phoned up. We found a sort of kiosk thing. We phoned up and we said, "Can you give us a lift home?" What? Where are you? I mean, the point about being safe, these places are meant to be safe and secure.
My impression of a high security place is something like you sneezed. Were you authorised to sneeze? That's my vision of a not being able to saunter around.
I know. And you think of a bunch of women who decide that they're going to go into a nuclear base, and I can remember being in there one time with a friend, and we decided to get as close as we could to the silos. Now you never want to go in there, because the closer you get, the more jittery they're going to be, and the more likely they will be to shoot you.
Well, shoot you?
Yes, shoot you. Oh,
Once you're on a military base, if you're not authorised, you can be liable to fatal violence. You can be shot dead. That would be publicity, that would be poor.
It would be very poor.
But the fact that you didn't get that close is absolutely astounding.
Yeah, we didn't get, but we got to, I think there were 3 layers, if I remember, of barbed wire. We got to the side. We were right by a road. The car, the military were driving past us. We laid down, and so long as you put your hood over your and had your face away, they couldn't see you. They're just looking down the beam of their vehicle. And we were right at the side of the road, and they drove past us. In the end, we said, "Oh, stop, this is getting too scary. Let's go back." You know. But it was just incredible that we'd got that close to being able to get in. It's quite remarkable sort of place. And you have to go.
No, I'm just amazed really, thinking about lots of things sparked by what you said. One of which is how identical the tactics at Greenham were to the tactics used in Calais, in the jungle. When they cleared the jungle, they just basically got diggers and steam. I mean, just every single bit of possession that the people had were just put into skips. Phones, socks, underwear, toiletries, papers, everything just brutally and violently trashed. So that was one echo I had. The way that people who work because it's the state, it is states who create that level of violence. So the people that work for the state are obliged to surrender their own humanity and become extremely cruel and violent as your bailiffs. Bailiffs, not your bailiffs, but bailiffs you recall there. And how, yes, humour in the right place is astonishing and lifting, and also getting a message across that's different to anything else anyone might have heard in another area of their lives.
Can I ask you, sorry, when you said that you might have to go to court, did you have someone fighting for you on the legal side of things? Or did you, lawyers and barristers that were really...
There was legal aid in those days. Just like the NHS, you were entitled to your legal aid, that's gone. But that was what the Tories did. They waged warfare on us from 2010. So the LASPO, which is the legal aid, something, I've forgotten what the rest of it means, that was all done away with in 2010, was it? Yeah. Now, the people who get arrested now, like Alfie Meadows, for example, whose skull was smashed to bits by a mounted policeman, he would have died if he hadn't had NHS neurosurgery, and he would have been imprisoned now, or he would have died, and something would have happened, because he had legal aid to fight his case. It's taken 13 years? They've finally now admitted that the police did it, and that he didn't commit criminal damage, etc., and they've awarded him damages for the destruction of his life, because of course he was a first year's undergraduate destined for a wonderful future. That's all gone. But the only reason that Alfie has got that is because there was legal aid at the time.
But actually a lot of the women at camp used to represent themselves. I was only in court a couple of times, but I didn't have legal aid or anything. I represented myself.
Oh, okay.
Which was, and some women chose to pay fines. I paid a fine one time because it wasn't at the right time in my life to be sent to prison. Next time I was in court, I expected to be sent down, but in fact we won the bylaws at that stage, so I wasn't sent down. In fact, I in some ways I would like to have gone to see what we do as a society to women who are imprisoned. Some women had barristers and so on. There were a couple of women who were sent down for 6 months. They had got into an aeroplane and they security and all that. They'd got into the aeroplane, and it was a stealth bomber, which is painted with a particular type of paint so that it doesn't reflect radar or something.
Yeah.
They got into that and they sprayed and broke equipment in the cockpit, and they weren't very happy about it, the emotion. So they got sent down. I mean, people admitted what they'd done.
Yeah.
That was the point, was owning what you'd done, kind of thing.
Another thing that popped into my head there is that one thing I learned at that time was that every so-called RAF base in this country is actually an American base, American Air Force base, which I hadn't known that, because of our special relationship with the Americans. So if it says RAF blah blah blah, it's actually USLF.
That's every single RAF base, every single one.
I haven't done the research recently.
Yeah.
That's where Airstrip 1 comes from.
Yeah, we're Airstrip 1.
Yes, and of course, as you probably know, they're bringing more American missiles back to Lakenheath in Suffolk, and there's quite a move to try and prevent that.
I'll be there.
Yeah, I haven't been up there, but I've been on a couple of demonstrations. But we used to have a lot of visitors at Greenham. There were people from all over the world who came. There were women who lived there from all over the world as well. I remember a woman, Dido, who was from Canada, and a woman from Sweden, and, you know, and they would stay, people would stay, sometimes women would stay for a night or just a few hours, and sometimes they'd stay for weeks or months or whatever. And all of those women, or all the women who went there, were regarded as Greenham women because you'd taken that step.
The big thing that we used to say, which meant so much to me at the time, because sometimes when you can't be there yourself and you know what's going on, you feel, well, I felt a certain grief at not being there, not being, you know, not supporting whatever weird or horrible thing was going on at the time for fellow women. I remember we said, there were loads of songs that we sang, and the one that meant so much to me was "We're Taking Greenham Home." And to be honest with you, I would say that that is what I've done. I've never, ever, I went on a march trip from Aldermaston when I was 14, and from that moment to now, I have not changed in my awareness that if I do not stand up against something, I'm complicit in it. It doesn't matter what that intervention is, because I used to think it meant that I had to keep climbing over barbed wire fences and blocking the port of Dover, which we can come on to in a minute to talk about Greenham when we're ready. Not Greenham, what's it called? Guernica. The Guernica. Because I've learned that an intervention, it doesn't matter how tiny it is, it does not matter. I was taught that by an amazing Turkish academic who'd been imprisoned and tortured because of his commitment to freedom and justice and equality for all. Even though he was imprisoned and tortured for months and months and months, he never wavered from this. He said, it does not matter how small your intervention is. Every intervention has its effects. Doesn't matter how small it is. And I found, you know, small and big, there is no small and big, it's still an intervention. So I found that incredibly consoling, particularly as I get older and can't do as much as I might want to do anymore, because unfortunately the body does start saying, no, don't do that, it's going to take you a month to recover. You can do it, but it just takes bloody ages to recover from it now. So yeah, I don't know why I intervened on what you were saying at that point.
I can't remember. Never mind.
Oh, I know. Yeah, thank you. It's to do with taking Greenham home.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and you're saying about how you used to feel, you know, when you're not there. I can remember passing skips that had lots of wood in and thinking, you know, knowing that the women were up there freezing cold because there was not enough wood for the fire. I mean, the fire, I used to quite like going wooding. There were several woods around, but you're not coming back with very substantial wood. It's sort of twigs, really, you know, sort of small branches, and they're green anyway, so they're giving off a lot of smoke. So it was quite a problem trying to always keep warm in that sort of place. And hot water bottles were important. There are two kettles. One that was a hot water
Always
bottle kettle, because you didn't change the water, because water you had to collect right from a standpipe, and it's heavy. So you had one bottle that was the hottie kettle for the hot water for the bottles, and the other one was for the tea, and there was always tea needed. Yeah, it's.
And maybe to go back to taking Greenham home as well. Jenny and I worked together on a big banner, which it was Louise's idea, this banner, which we'll show you in a moment. We decided to remake Picasso's Guernica as a protest banner. So we'll show it to you in a minute. But for me, that's part of my time in Greenham. That is why I was thankful to accept Louisa's invitation to work on that banner, if you like.
Yes, I mean, in fact, banner making has always obviously been a tradition amongst people worldwide, and there were an awful lot of banners. I have a book here of the banners, some of the banners that were made by various groups to take to Greenham and at Greenham. I mean, we used to make quick ones at Greenham, like if we were going to do some sort of action, we just have a sheet, an old sheet or something. You know, go down to the town, go to a charity shop, buy a sheet, buy a pot of paint and quickly do a message. And obviously, you know, so those have got lost. I mean, I have no idea where half those things are. But at the time they were very useful and relevant to actually have these banners so that people knew what you were up to and why. Which is why I think banners, I'm a great person, I make banners a lot, and I think that's, to me, it's whenever I see a demonstration, I look to see what the banners say on the placards, because then you know what it's all about. So we did a lot of that. There were some trips around many bases. There was one time when women went in one of the vans. Believe me, the vans were hilarious. I mean, the one at the gate that I used to go to was actually, it looked like the sort of thing you would expect to find on a farm with chickens living in it. I mean, it was just the most delightful. I remember when we were bailiffed one time, we had to move, and there was only two of us there. So there's myself driving this thing that you just terrified because it was just like driving an old bucket. And the woman who was with me, and we couldn't shut the doors, so she sat. The police allowed this. This shows the rules are just waved away at times like this. She squatted in the back of the van, holding the doors shut. So I had to drive along like, I mustn't go fast because she was going to fall out. It was terrible. I mean, so I just went to a lay-by nearby and did a U-turn. Bailiffs went past and I went back. But it was just madness. It was just to undermine us. Yeah, so we used to go off, I didn't do this one, but women went off and they had a peace camp at lots of different bases all around the country, which was really nice because they all thought that they were smart, you know, well, it doesn't happen here, we don't have those filthy old women. But, you know, the women would arrive, they'd cut a square of grass out, put it to the side, build a fire, light the fire, put the kettle on, and they'd stay there. And local people would sometimes come and say, oh, what's going on, you know? And they got support mostly wherever they went, in fact. Because wherever there's a base, you'll find, my impression is that you'll find people who support, which is no surprise really, is it? People who support and people who think you're the riff-raff of the world sort of thing, you know. So you get this complete conflict, which can be quite amusing at times when they face each other. But we used to leaflet in the area around about anyway, because there was a whole little village, almost a village, that was built for the military, the American military. And they used to come out and scream at us and throw the leaflets back. But yeah, so there were lots of trips that were planned, and women used to go off and do talks all over the place. They were invited to at the time, and go off abroad to give talks and so on. And so many visitors from many places, and you're forever writing letters. You know, you get letters and you reply. We tried to reply to all of them, and that would, you know, we actually got post delivered. I mean, you know, that's quite weird in itself.
I remember that I was working in the northeast before my daughter was born with a filmmaker who was recording the events of the miners' strike in a village called Easington. And I left at one point to go to Greenham because I promised to join some friends that weekend. So I went down to Greenham, spent however many days it was there, and while I was there, the women I was with said, well, we'll come back with you to the village, we'd love to meet. Because the women, the people in Easington, I don't know if you've ever read about what happened there, but the miners' wives were absolutely mind-blowing women. They kept that strike going. For, you know, it was, it's all historic now, but, you know, not just cooking every 3 meals a day for everyone, but also keeping the children, you know, looking after the children, making sure no one was going through intolerable stress without having some easing of that, shall we say. So anyway, the women that I was with at Greenham, we all went up to Easington, and they met. There was some event going on which I can't remember, that the women had organised, the miners' wives women, and I remember thinking, this is how revolution happens, when different struggles join together and connections start being made whereby everyone realises that we're all in the same struggle. And it was a really inspiring time, but I think that this is my personal theory, that is why Thatcher came down so brutally on the miners, because it started to join up with the struggle in the 6 counties, the miners' wives. There were other things going on at the time around the Greater London Authority, and it was necessary to wage economic war on all of that in order to disempower the whole lot, and that's been going on ever since. And we fought back all those years, we really have. It would be so much worse now if there hadn't been relentless struggle. But it has to go on, that's the thing. You can't just let all this shit happen.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
What?
What you just said, could you elaborate?
Elaborate on which bit?
Like, we need to continue.
Well, everyone has to find their own way and resist. I mean, what our way of resisting was to make this banner, which I can show you quickly now, and then we can maybe other people might like to answer your question.
Just to say that at Greenham, we made the links about the environment.
Exactly.
Because
and the arms trade.
Yeah, and the arms trade, yeah. And the militarisation of societies. And I mean, the militarisation that we see going on in all aspects of life in most countries is horrifying, isn't it, really? But we made the links very clearly. We were sort of very much aware of the fact that the environment is impacted by the military, just by their very presence of all the weaponry that they have, you know, the construction of the weaponry, and obviously during wartime the effects of what they do. I mean, if you look at the film we have of Gaza now, the film that we have of Gaza, with all the bombing that's happening, and when you think about the rebuilding of that as well. Shall I? That's the way. Sorry. Yes, and this. Did you want to say something about this?
I wanted to say something before, which kind of relates to this. Is that Maude? There we can't see. It's good you're holding it on. There's something I want to say in preface to this, is that when you talk about filthy women, and when Maude was talking about miners' wives, is we've celebrated both those things in films now and in art spaces, but at the time, women at Greenham were absolutely vilified outside the peace movement, the anti-arms trade movement, the socialist movement, the communist movement. And so the solidarity came from a sector that people stood together around some of those issues, but they were not celebrated in the way they are now.
Yeah.
In any way. So this isn't the first exhibition that has been, Greenham's been the centre of that. Anyway, so the idea was not that it was going to be collective from the very beginning, wasn't it? So I wrote to some people. This was shortly after March for England, people who've been writing with Maude from 2010. to 2014, fascists came to Brighton on St George's Day, and importantly the connection, I think, as well, is around nationalism, as they had a very strong and clear sense of English nationalism and superiority. And some of that comes from that, the special relationship between Britain and the US, and that kind of very British exceptionalism. So we got together because people of Brighton very well kind of stood up and got together and collectively resisted the English Defence League they were then, but we didn't have a very good visual presence, and we didn't have a very, did we? We was not, and so I was thinking, how can we express some of the issues around war and racism and fascism?
And also, I'll just jump in there, what we had also discovered at that time was that the Americans were using drones. Nobody knew what drones were at that time. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that what catapulted us into doing this was the 2012 bombardment of Gaza by drones, during which none of the names of the Palestinian people who were being killed were recorded. And then one of us found a blog that a young Palestinian was keeping. It wasn't even a blog because they couldn't have access to the internet. It was just a document we found online, where all that it was the names of each person who was killed, and they kept updating it. And that's what spurred us as well, I think, to educate people about drones.
Yeah, Maude and Nicola Ashmore were responsible for the horse in the middle. Jenny, as you can tell, is a very experienced band, and Megan made the beautiful Baba holding a dead baby, in fact.
And we chose to do that as colour, because Picasso's was all monochrome, but Jenny chose to...
well, the green, purple, and it's meant to be green, purple, and white, but obviously I chose to do it sort of flesh coloured, white flesh coloured, and the baby is mixed race. So that was my thinking with that, the sort of symbolism, because it was also sort of to do with updating some of the images, or that is to say, making them part of today's.
I think we spent about 2 years talking and making together. About 7 or 8 of us, it shifted a little bit, and then it was completed through public sewing. So lots of people produced it in the library here. It went to India. It went to Manchester. So it was contributed to different places, usually with some kind of connection.
Yeah. So Delane invited us to Brixton, John, to 98 Gallery in Brixton, and we had a big sewing there while she and Damien were doing that big map. I can't remember what that exhibition was called, but it was the Romany maps.
I think it was called Gypsy ?
Gypsyland, was it?
So Maude, you were saying it's already been to Dover.
Oh yeah,
quite
that
dirty
was funny.
in Dover. So
We closed the port with it on a day when it was pouring with rain, and there was only me and Trini carrying it. It weighed a ton because it was soaking wet.
It weighs a
We
ton
were
now.
dragging it along the road, and Trini and I just got this crazy idea at the same time. She was right over there, I was over here. We looked at each other and we realised we wanted to close the port with it. So we literally just we walked across one of the roads with all the lorry drivers coming down, and they were hooting. And I thought they were being aggressive, but they actually thought it was wonderful. They were all going, yeah! But yeah, sorry, Louise. So it is a protest banner as well as hanging in galleries.
And it's been in Hove recently, just a week ago.
Yeah, it's going out tomorrow for the Gaza protest of the peace statue. This keffiyeh here comes from a Palestinian fighter, because Trini, who is one of the contributors, had been to Palestine and Gaza several times at that point, and subsequently has continued. And Jenny's choice of the suffragist movement's colours there, because Jenny is still a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
Yes, you'll find, hopefully on your chair you found one of our leaflets and a booklet. WILF is something that started during the First World War when women were trying to, the little blue book, where women were trying to put an end to that war, and they managed to gather together in 1915 at The Hague, and there were women, I think there were about 1,000 women, and they were from many countries, including Germany and the UK and America and Italy and Spain, and they all sat on the same platform, even though their menfolk were probably on the battlefront at that time. But they sat there and said, this has to stop. They didn't want to go down the blame route. Well, if you hadn't done, so they decided they came up with a whole load of policies, if you like, and they chose some delegates from amongst them and went off to see the heads of state of practically every country, or every country they could get to. Including the Pope, in fact, and all those heads of state said it was a stupid war, but none of them had the courage to do anything about it, and therefore it went ahead. And women, there are sections now in 37, I think it's 37 countries, and we have NGO status at United Nations, and so we have an office there in Geneva and one in America, in New York. And the women there go and they do the research and can contribute to the discussions that go on at the United Nations. In fact, there's one of the, I can't think what the word is, UN 1325. Yes, there's a policy. Policy is not the right word. What's the word?
Resolution.
Resolution. Thank you. That's to enhance women's role in all activities to do with decision making and implementation, and to make sure that women have power in these areas. And WILF was very much at the forefront of this. There were a lot of WILF women at Greenham. There were all sorts of strange things that happened, like because it was all women, the men in the base all said, you're all lesbians, which was quite funny in a way, because they were nearly all men. Hello, are they all gay? I mean, and even if it had been all lesbians, and it wasn't, it was a great mix of women. So what? Does that invalidate what they're, what they're saying? It was just extraordinary. I mean, there was a lot of serious actions as well. I mean, just as this gets taken on serious actions, there was, I can remember a daylight action that we did when the missiles were being delivered, so the tension is high in the base at such a time, and there were MOD and American troops everywhere with machine guns inside the base, and we just at a certain time we all cut holes and ran in, and there were dozens and dozens of us running in. And the man who stopped me, the American with his gun pointing at my head, said, he said something about, you're in our base. And I said, I thought I was in Berkshire in England. But you have to be very careful because they're hyped up, they're really ready to go. And this sort of thing can be provocative, can't it? I mean, you can get people angry because you're facing them with what?
Well, one of the things I find astonishing about this banner is that it stops people in their tracks.
They know it.
Do you not remember the number of times it stopped mounted police at Victoria Gardens when they were all riding towards us and we were walking down towards them? The horse, our horse, stopped their horses. And then again at the clock tower, there was a similar thing that happened there when there was the EDL, was it March for England, had come to Brighton, and we went to stop them there, and the mounted police were of course protecting them and attacking us. But when they saw the banner, they came to a halt. They didn't really know what to do. It was most peculiar, actually. I'll never forget that. I've never had anyone say anything horrible when we've been carrying it.
No, sorry, I guess I was thinking more of banners in general,
Oh,
that
yeah.
they, that when they see banners it can, you know, make them cross
Oh, yes.
because they're being
Yeah,
faced
yeah.
with
Can I ask a
what you're
question
saying.
about Greenham?
Sorry?
Can I ask a question about Greenham?
Yeah, yeah.
What, it's a general question. What do you think the impact was of Greenham, and what do you think changed because of that action?
I think that because of Greenham, that's why they moved them from being land-based, because it cost, every time they took the missiles out on their little forays down to Salisbury Plain, they would have sort of about 10 or 12 minibuses full of military police to stop us from getting anywhere near them as much as they possibly could. So it cost them a huge amount of money, but it also meant that they must have realised that if women with just a pair of what we used to call knitting needles, bolt cutters, could get into the base, it really was very vulnerable. And that's why they that's why they made them sea launched. That's what I think anyway. They made them sea launched up from Paz Lane. And this move to have them based at Suffolk again, the American ones in Lake and Heath, that's a move backwards in that sense, because, you know, going back to being land-based, but air-launched, but land-based sort of thing. So that's an interesting, that's what I think is the legacy, if you like, of Greenham.
Do you think it changed what people think about aerial bombardment? Because that's what this image is about, and that's what nuclear weapons are about, is that they are launched from the air, and therefore you cannot discriminate against who will be killed. So all aerial bombardment, in a way, is an attack on civilians, nuclear or otherwise, and that's what this, you know, these were. That's why it's really interesting that Maude replaced the figures with drones, because Picasso had the text from the newspaper he read in Paris about the people in Guernica who were killed. But I don't know, do you think it's shifted? This is a question for both of you about whether or not we accept aerial bombardment.
I think that now, particularly, people are very much aware that, I'm hoping, that aerial bombardment is such a totally unacceptable way of behaving. I mean, the whole military machine, anyway, to some of us is completely appalling. But I think aerial bombardment is undoubtedly the worst type, in a sense, because it doesn't discriminate, as you say. I mean, like what's going on in Gaza at the moment, and in Ukraine, and in other parts of the world too, Yemen and so on. I mean, it is very much aerial bombardment that's the thing that's actually doing so much damage. And
When I was a child in London, I was at my primary school, and we had to. President Kennedy was Irish, and Irish heritage, and I was at an Irish convent primary school, just a little primary school, but it was run by Irish nuns. And I remember that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were all on the ground, we were all on our knees praying for President Kennedy to have the angels, you know, think of something to stop the bomb dropping, because we were on a knife edge then.
yeah.
And the reason it didn't happen is very nice. They compromised. And that's what we need, that message of compromise has to, I mean, God in heaven above, what can be done now, where those men will not compromise with each other because there is too much at stake for them in terms of money. You know, the arms trade is what creates the you know, so much. Sorry, I'm getting off the point there, but
I think that is the point. I think one big problem why all these things happen is there are people that design weapons, and it's a business.
Yeah.
it is a
And the
huge
business
yeah.
business of weaponry is killing people, and
Yes.
it has to be said.
And it's in their interest to
in many
actually
cases is the attitude,
maintain.
which is appalling.
Yeah.
Can I interject with, it's completely off topic, can we stand down the banner posts?
Yes.
Because I was looking at-
the area of environment,
The
your
argument
question.
from one. It's not, we haven't particularly speaking power again. I think the distance between audiences in art galleries and people on demonstrations and those in power is the ability. So Maude passed around that amazing image of everybody marching against the Iraq War, and then on the back of the image is the belief of a single male politician that says, "I strongly believe that to take less."
Exactly.
So I think it's that's the problem, is that I think discourses with the shift, people, media narratives are shifting. You know, I don't think we should give up, but I think the key is the space
I mean,
between us and them.
the crucial bit of this banner for me is the choice that Mega, one of our contributors, Mega Rajshuru, who went to India to do a public sewing and was donated cotton, handloom cotton from Gandhi Ashram, which is the red, well, the maroon and the grey. Megha, who is an artist, she chose to paint a little oil painting through the window in Picasso's original. I think it's a destroyed, bombed building that you see through that window, because this is what happened in Guernica when the entire village was pulverised over a period of hours. But that's what gives me hope, is that we have to keep fighting together. And it's like, I remember thinking how easily feminism suddenly became a really bad word. Does anyone else remember that happening?
Yes.
Yeah? So I was one of the, and presumably you were as well, Jenny, one of the second wave of feminism in the late 60s, early 70s, joining with the civil rights movements in the United States and the 6 counties of Ireland. It was all one. Bernadette McCalliskey, Bernadette Devlin became an MP at the age of 20 and slapped Reginald Morgan across the face in the Commons because he lied. You're not allowed to say in the Commons that another MP has lied. That is not allowed. She did, and she walloped him and got taken out because she saw the only language he understood was violence. So whack. Anyway, that's got me off topic a bit. What was I saying before? Oh yeah. It's the notion of I've gone off it again. It's the ways in which struggle. Yes, as Walter Benjamin, anyone who's read him, says, that any opposition to a power system gets absorbed by that power system and disempowered. Now, I watched that happen with the word feminism, so that my daughter came home from school one day when she was about 11 and said, "Mum, you're not really a feminist, are you?" Because the other girls in her class had made fun of her when she said, "My mum is a feminist," and they all attacked her because by then that word had developed really nasty connotations of stupidity, hairy armpits, hysteria, you name it, all those stereotype tropes, and misogynistic. That's what happened for how many years? 20 years did that go on? Now, all of us, well, not all of a sudden, but gradually, I'm hearing more and more women saying that they are feminist. And in fact, feminism now has become mainstream again. But this is what happens, you see. I've watched it happen so many times in my life, and presumably other people have noticed. And how do we stop that? That's a question that's something that we can do. You asked a question about what can we do, is to just constantly scrutinise the way language is used. I mean, I find that what I'm doing myself, my personal thing, is to try and eliminate the language of violence from my language, so that I find it very difficult to say I hate anything. This is just me. And I find it very difficult to use the word CUNT in any other way than it is to denote a part of my anatomy. I will not have it. I can't have it used in any other way in my own voice. And I mean, that's just me, and I'm finding that other people are doing it as well. I'm noticing this, that people are not using the language of violence as much as they used to, and I have an innocent and probably naive faith that if enough people do something, it does change things.
I like the thing, you know, the yellow rubber ducks. I think humours are really. I did say that word you don't like, you know, that. You said I call Trump a cunt, but he hasn't got the warmth or the depth.
All right,
So, no, but rescue it with a joke, you know, and that's kind of a way of doing it. I'm with you, absolutely.
Can I just say, just to address the point that you were making there, the first half of September, I don't know if you know, I'm sure some of you will know, that there was an arms fair at the Excel Centre. It's the biggest one that happens in this country, and it's every 2 years. And I was up there with women and lots of other people. And at one point, we were there at lunchtime, and the people in the doing the sales were coming out, and you could see them beaming and rubbing their hands. Oh, I did really well today. I sold lots of weapons. And it's the cynicism is, I find, quite staggering. You know, that these people are promoting and desperate to maintain wars and killing.
That's one thing I would recommend, is that everyone makes a special trip up to the arms fair when it comes.
Yes, I think that's an excellent
And the
idea.
more people that turn up there, the better.
Yeah.
One of my friends who's a councillor from, I better not say the borough of London, the London borough, she went up there in her car and very cleverly de-locked herself onto the steering. She de-locked each ankle and each wrist very, very cleverly. With her friend was driving, but while they were driving along, she did this, and he suddenly drove in front of the doors of the Excel Centre, and she couldn't be moved. It took them 9 hours. It took the police 9 hours to move her from that position, and I just thought that was brilliant, because it held up business for a whole day. And we saw all these fucking missiles on the backs of their great big lorries, and it is chilling to see them. You must see them, you must make them real in your body, and then you will never, you know, allow that you will carry on fighting against them, especially if you want there to be a world, you know, in the, anyway.
Very quickly, now you've mentioned the arms fair. There are so many small groups in Brighton and Hove like this, and various issues, and they overlap. You know, feminism gets into anti-war and all the rest of it. We need to have some kind of meeting well before the arms fair that we start to plan. And so it's the biggest protest ever against an arms fair in this country, because it's the biggest bloody arms fair.
Yeah, it is.
And this, I think, would be a very good idea. That's all I have to say.
That's great, and that's a really good suggestion. So
Well, I
if
had to
anyone
make
wants
it.
to find
I'm
out
sorry I
about
interfered, but,
that,
you know.
go on the Campaign Against the Arms Trade website.
Well, I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, and they will have a link to Brighton on there. The group in Brighton at the moment is dormant. I know that because I used to be part of it. But during the lockdown, I think it all dissipated a bit.
From somebody who does a lot of research against the factory in Moulsecoomb, that there's an application in at the council for an extension, and that we need to keep our eye on that to an extension.
Oh yes,
to the
that's another brilliant thing.
So they do still make the bomb release mechanisms, and
In Moulsecoomb, in the factory, those drones couldn't drop their bombs without that component that's made in Moulsecoomb.
So
Yeah, Yeah.
and find out the planning hasn't gone through yet, has it?
No. I have a theory, and I keep being distracted by walls like the Garden of War. Basically, that land is owned by the council. The council can say what happens on their land, and it would be really good to get a movement going to stop, to say you should not be allowing weapons of any type or size to be made on your land, and that could be in the contract. And then it's worth trying, isn't it? I'm afraid I keep getting started on it and then getting distracted because of the rest of the world.
Yeah, we need,
It's possible to bring a lawsuit on behalf of the people of Brighton. And my old C&D days suddenly spring out at me. And that could go on for 18 months.
Yeah, because also the
I've got some lawyers I've known for years.
Oh right, well.
Are you going to do that then? Is that what
I'm
you're
not.
saying?
Look, I don't want to. I've got medical problems at the moment, very serious ones. But I think it's time that somebody else took over because I've been doing this for 50 years plus, and we ought to be saying, well, hang on. We ought to have a squad and we ought to look at these things every time, because half the hotel trade in Brighton is about very nasty people with very nasty ideas. Basically digging bloody great holes in forests and, factories to make bombs and God knows what else. You see, as you say, you see them coming out. And no, we need to, on our own doorstep, if we don't do this, then everything else we do is just airy-fairy.
Yes, I mean, the people of Malvern managed to get rid of an arms fair that was going on there.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Just recently.
Yeah, very recently. I mean, it can be done.
It should be done.
It can and should be done. Yes. Yeah,
I'm sorry, that's all I have to say. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, it's very well, a very good intervention.
I think we are fast approaching our time limit.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions from all?
Can we go and burn the beach?
We can go and burn the beach in 1 minute if you like. If not, if there's any questions? No? In that case, I'd really like to say thank you so much, Jenny and Maude. Actually also just extend the thanks, not just for coming today, but for all the work you've done to this point, which is terrific and inspirational to us all. So thank you.